Good morning, everyone. Really pleased to be here. Big thank you to the organizers, AIPH, for the invitation, and to all the speakers for sharing your wisdom this morning. So I'm going to try and address this question that I'm sure all of you woke up this morning asking yourself, do urban nature-based solutions work? With examples from Southeast Asia. As background, as Tim mentioned, I did the Resilient and Inclusive Cities Lab at NTU in Singapore, and what we do is try to increase the evidence base, so do more science on nature-based solutions for urban resilience and climate adaptation, and use this science to inform policy and practice. So it's very applied research in that sense. You'll see that through the projects. So a lot of us have already talked about nature-based solutions today. Perhaps with the science background, I'll start with the definition so we are all on the same page. Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, manage, or restore all the blue and green bits on the pictures that I'm showing here. So they actually do two things. They help provide benefits to people, and they're also benefiting biodiversity. So always this dual impact for society and for biodiversity. So you can see that in practice they look very natural, very wild still, or very engineering or man-made, such as the rain garden or the green roof, which I'll talk about more later. So these are some of the examples. Again, even from the introduction from Bill Hardy this morning, we talked about all these benefits that nature-based solutions provide. We've talked about flood mitigation, air quality, carbon sequestration. So all these are sometimes called ecosystem services, these benefits. So, to go back to the questions, do they work? There's lots of evidence from, not only from myself, but from many people around the world looking at this. So we know, for example, when it comes to the climate crisis, when we talk about mitigating, so sequestering carbon, we know that nature-based solutions can actually help with 37%, so 1/3 of the emission reduction that are needed to remain below 2 degrees target. So that's quite a significant amount. We also know that this is an example of almost 400 studies reviewed by researchers and demonstrating that for food security, for freshwater flooding, for timber production, the vast majority of the studies were actually demonstrating a positive effect. More evidence, reports after reports. Most of you may be familiar with the IPCC. IPBES is essentially IPCC for biodiversity and ecosystem services. So it's essentially scientists from all over the world getting together to synthesize the evidence. And so all of these reports repeatedly say, yes, nature-based solutions work. So short answer to the question, yes, and you do not need to take my word for it, but yes, there's enough evidence for all these nature-based solutions. So yes, but the figure that I just showed earlier had lots of green, so again for each of these benefits, we see that there is a lot of evidence that they do work, but we also see some red or blue. If you look at the legend here, it means that some of them were either negative or mixed results. So some of the studies showed that perhaps the flood reduction did not really happen. A lot of them showed that reduced water availability did not really, improved water availability did not really happen. If you think about trees, we were talking about what we learned in elementary school. Trees do use water, so yes, it is one of the things that they're not always great at is increasing water availability, especially when we look at the annual timescale. So it does mean that it's overwhelming, yes, but there's a need to better understand perhaps what are these situations when it's a negative result, or maybe how positive is positive. So if it's a yes, but only for a tiny amount, maybe we'd be better investing our money elsewhere in non-nature-based solutions. And then the other question is, who decided these indicators were the relevant ones? So a lot of the conversation about nature-based solutions now is also about what do we need by nature-based solutions work? Who decides on the indicators? Who decided that these air quality, water availability, especially the more social indicators, who decided that they were the right ones? And in using an American reference here, I guess we are also reminded that what's happening in the US right now can be concerning with different visions and worldviews and perhaps different truth, since we were talking about truth this morning. So the IUCN, everyone familiar with IUCN in the room? The protected species people, they did help with providing some standard for nature-based solutions. So they help with providing criteria for a lot of these nature-based solutions. How can we provide systematic indicators that will help for us to know how to measure and what to measure? Some of them are really about what are the indicators for societal challenges, how do we measure biodiversity. But it's also about what is the process for implementing a nature-based solution. We heard a lot from landscape architects this morning. Very important part of the very important stakeholder in this conversation about greening cities. But it's also about how to include communities' perceptions, local governments, private sector. So the way we actually implement nature-based solutions is as important as what we create, what we manage on the ground. And so I was just looking at the website also from AIPH. Again, these standards and the way we measure is very, very important for how we provide recommendations. So one of the missions from AIPH is also to help provide these standards, these guidelines to mainstream. I think there was a call this morning again and again for all of us to try and promote these approaches. But what standards do we use? How do we do this? So what I'm talking about here is really about making it easier for people to have the evidence and also monitor and improve projects in cities, one project after the next. So how does this work in practice? I guess this was my introduction to actually explain why monitoring, evaluation, learning is not as boring as it sounds. It's often if you write grants, if you look at projects, it's like, yes, beautiful pictures of what we want to implement. The monitoring and evaluation is a side note at best. But perhaps as a scientist and engineer by background, I do feel like this is super important to convince and demonstrate that green cities is not just an idea, but that these benefits do exist, but also, importantly, improve practice. Again, there are things that we know work, but maybe not in every situation or every country. So I'm going to use 3 case studies of research that we do in the lab to demonstrate the value of this monitoring and evaluation. Again, perhaps only with a background in urban water engineering, this title, Green Infrastructure Monitoring for Water Management, sounds exciting. That's why it's actually very exciting to monitor these rain gardens. And I had to present this project also because we've heard from Mrs. Kochakorn this morning about the beautiful green roofs that were developed and built in Bangkok. And this is one of the projects that we are monitoring in the lab. So for the first one is here in Singapore on campus at Nanyang Technological University. We have a rain garden. Perhaps I'll just move back to the first. Oh no, I cannot go back. Maybe Tim, this is a trick for people not to go over 20 minutes. We cannot go to the previous slide. Oh no, I can. Thank you. All right, so rain gardens on the very first picture here. Rain gardens are essentially a depression in the soil, filled up with different layers and vegetated, and they're great in helping treat stormwater. So stormwater is diverted to the rain garden and treated to either be infiltrated or go back to the piped network. So of course they are great, but we do need to know how much water is actually treated and goes through the rain garden. So that's what we're doing with this project. And what these figures mean is what we want to look at is for each rain event. So these would be 6 different rain events end of last year, and we want to know if how much of the stormwater is actually being retained by the rain garden. The more retained, the better it is at reducing flooding. So 2 messages here. One is that across the board, there's about 30% of the stormwater that is retained, so that's already a great outcome. The more scientific research type outcome is that if we don't monitor, if we don't instrument these systems, the models that we would have actually overestimates the amount of retention. So this is really demonstrating the importance of monitoring each rain garden, because if we just use generic models, we might not get the full picture of the performance. Similar to in the green roof in Bangkok here, we are monitoring 2 of the legs. I believe this is an H for humanity. I'm looking at Mrs. Kochakon for confirmation. So 2 of these legs have actually, they've been planted with different types of vegetation. So here again, an interesting question is to see how much different types of vegetation help reduce stormwater and what are the benefits in terms of flood retention. The slide is actually cut off. All these are very preliminary results from Ningding, the PhD student in the lab, looking at the project. And we feel like both of the legs or parts of the roof are actually about the same retention, within 5% difference, but stay tuned and we can confirm that in a couple of months. Second project that I want to talk about very briefly, again because I don't have so much time, we're going to Malaysia this time. So we started a project with the Resilient Cities Network in Melaka. The big question over there, like in many Asian cities, is urban heat. What do we do with rising temperatures and urban heat island in these cities? So same here, I'm not going to talk so long about the project, but we've done a lot of community engagement and also installed sensors indoors and outdoors. Indoor temperatures for a lot of the communities we've monitored can go to up to 32, 34 indoors and not going down during the night, which is quite concerning. Outdoors, we are starting to see the results as well, comparing parts. You can see the green line on these graphs with the denser parts of the city. So the idea here is really to create the baseline data, and now we're working with the city on interventions, planting trees, using cool painting, and we'll use this data also to see how much the interventions actually affect the thermal environment. Last project I want to talk about, coming back to Bangkok here, is a project that we started with our collaborators at Asst University in collaboration with CODI. So we are looking at informal settlement upgrading program. For background, does anyone maybe from our Thai colleagues here know about the Ban Man Khong program? Yes, a few hands up. So this is a very impressive program looking at improving, Ban Man Khong means secured housing, so improving the housing for lots of the informal settlements, also called slums along the river. The canals that we talked about already this morning there's a lot of water quality issues, lots of insecurity in terms of land tenure. Flood risk is very, very high. And so the program is actually looking at relocating or upgrading in place for these communities. So when we started the project, we wanted to see whether there was space for nature-based solutions in these upgrading projects. When we look at completed projects, nature can look like this. You can see in front of people's houses here, very small patches of green, very manicured, very nice gardens. But on other projects, nature looks like this. This is a termite mound turned shrine, as we can see mainly now in more rural areas, but also in this case in urban upgraded projects. So you can feel intuitively that nature in these two examples looks very, very different. So what we've done is really trying to better understand what different stakeholders in these projects, how did they think about nature, and asking them what were the preferred nature-based solutions and so on and so forth. So we looked at government, researchers, funders and NGOs as well as community leaders, and found that there were indeed some commonalities. Planting trees is always a winner, but also differences in how they perceive the barriers to implementing nature-based solutions. What we've done is also interviewing residents directly to understand how they perceive nature, what they valued. And I won't share so many details on this, but essentially what we found is that residents expressed a diversity of values and preferences. Some of them had a more transactional, or what we call instrumental value of nature. So they really valued getting food or medicinal plants, getting some shade from nature. Others would be more about relational values, so how they actually relate, and perhaps their spirituality and religion would be related to these values. Others were really respecting nature as we need to protect nature because nature was here before us, kind of mindset. So this helps us understand the different types of personas, essentially, different types of residents, and helps cater and address nature-based solutions, implement nature-based solutions in a way that really speaks to people's values. So just to conclude, this idea of the three different types of values is actually not ours. There are lots of people around the world working on these questions. So again, with this idea that we don't all value nature for the same reasons. And it's extremely important to remember this when we actually want to promote nature in cities, as many of us want to do. Understanding that some people may value it for more instrumental, transactional type of values, as opposed to just respecting nature, does have implications in the projects in practice. So for example, this is another project in Indonesia that we are working on. These different types of values help us redesign and reimagine future cities. You can see that these three cartoons represent a green city, right? But the way nature is implemented and present in these three types of cities is actually quite different. One of them has lots of very wild forests, protected and very dense buildings, as opposed to nature in a bit everywhere spread out into the city. So these would be some of the more practical implications of understanding this diversity of values related to nature in cities. So just a few reflections on the case studies. I think the three projects that I presented demonstrate that there's diversity in metrics and approaches for monitoring and evaluating these nature-based solutions, but also a lot of tools and technologies, so sensors, modeling, but also tools in the sense of frameworks and ways of thinking that help us better understand the real nature of nature-based solutions. So with this, a few conclusion, kind of highlights for the talk. Yes, nature-based solutions work, so we don't need to wait to get started. We have enough evidence from around the world that they do work. Also, yes, we need to further understand, maybe this is the pitch for academics in the room and research. We do need to further understand and continue monitoring, evaluating them to do even better in the future. So there's room for creative thinking, new metrics and approaches for these nature-based solutions, and I always enjoy working with my Thai colleagues, so there's lots of capacity here. But also appropriate partnerships with academics, private sector, NGOs. We're all in this together, and I think this is what we're learning project after project. It's only with these strong partnerships that we manage to actually move the conversation forward. So with that, I'll stop here. Huge thank you to my lab, without whom any of this would not be possible. And I'll be looking forward to questions after the talk. Thank you.